well, let's get going. First, I know we had a lot of speakers, so I'm going to ask each of you to just the 10-second reminder of who you are and what your role is real quick, and then we'll start taking the questions from the audience.
So I'm Aaron, site reliability engineer for Lumen Digital.
Crux Conception, Stacy Jenkins, Fort Wayne, Indiana, team builder.
Farrah Campbell from Portland, Oregon, and I'm the Ecosystems Director at Stackery.
Hi, Damon Edwards with Rundeck. I spoke on SRE and incident response, incident management, and all related operational topics.
Hi, Mike Nygard, developer, operator, author, architect.
Hi, Quintessence with Logs.io, currently a developer advocate, aka recovering SRE, and also leader of Inclusive Tech Buffalo.
I'm Damon Finster, currently the CD team lead at FireEye.
I'm Bryan Finster, developer, lead the Walmart DevOps Dojo. No relation.
All right, who's got the first question out there? Right over there, Mark, in the back. Or kind of. Yeah. Tell me, he's going to get his steps in.
So you know.
I got the easy part.
Thank you. So I wanted to take an example that you gave, the Schlage lock, that, you know, it used to be this cool thing. We stamp some metal parts, we send it to Home Depot, we hopefully never see it again. Now we have this thing talking to us. Okay, so pushing on that, Susie Homemaker goes to Home Depot and gets her brand new Schlage lock, and she bolts it onto her front door, and she goes to the website per the instructions and types in the serial number, and nothing happens. So she's going to pick up the phone or go to the website or something, and somebody's going to need to walk her through the fact that her home router is stupid and the Schlage lock can't talk to the Wi-Fi and therefore can't get to your cloud. Who takes that call? If you build it, you own it. So who owns that? Traditionally, that's been a call center, some operations thing, some team of people who know hopefully something about home Wi-Fi, but probably not the guys designing locks and stuff like that.
I'm holding the mic, so I'll take it. Is the software broken? Then that's not the. I don't. When people say you build it, you run it, I don't think that's what they mean. They mean you run it. Like, is the service working? Is the service running? In that case, you'd say that there's nothing wrong with the service. Now, maybe there's some user input that needs to be. There's some requirements for the future. So we need to have a feedback loop in terms of, like, well, how do you get that, to the people that make the software, that there's something they can do on their end. But if it's purely a other connection, that would be a separate customer support department, right? Because the service may not be meeting the customer's satisfaction, but that's not a problem with that software service. So I would say that developers aren't taking those calls, but what you have to be careful of is having them get a feedback loop from the call center, from the customer support function. And I imagine if you're in business, you're going to have more than just that example. You're going to have returns, you're going to have complaints, you're going to have all sorts of other things that happen around that. So I'd say the service isn't broken in that case, from that you build it, you run it scenario. Does that make sense?
So if the developer determines that the service is running, and maybe I haven't phrased my example well enough, but the customer is not happy. The customer, they bought the thing and it doesn't work.
Right.
So
so that's a product failure. So then that feedback needs to get into the product group, just like any other feedback would, right? But fundamentally, like, is it performing to this current service level of, objective, the actual online service that this thing runs with? If it's meeting the requirements in the service, like, you can argue this is a product management problem, this could be a product design problem. Like, there's a feedback loop that definitely has to happen. But in that exact scenario, the developers are not on call to go help, Susie CEO or whoever your example was with her locks. Does that make sense? Like you'd have to have, that's just a business decision, Dab. Now you could just say, hey, you're on your own, Susie, like use the web form and submit feedback. That's a bad business decision. You're probably going to want to have some human beings there, just like the bottle of your shampoo has a number to call to ask for shampoo tips, right, or whatever. Like that's that's your business decision to have that customer support buffer there, but it's not fundamentally what people are talking about when they say you build it, you run it, because technically the service is running, right, to the specification that we all had agreed to beforehand.
Have you ever called that number? The shampoo number?
I never have. I've always been fascinated about call for Velveeta for recipes. I don't know.
I think maybe even a little input to that is so some of these things you're gonna have to scale, right? If you have hundreds of thousands of customers and you're two pizza dev team, right? But how do you be accountable and care about that and get, to your point, get that feedback back, right? Because if it gets stuck in that call center and it never gets back to your thing isn't usable enough, or the users aren't smart enough to use it and hook it up, then that is a product challenge, right?
That's product management feedback,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. See what product managers for, hopefully. Yeah.
All right, next question.
One thing you got to think about as we transform companies to DevOps and more agile approaches is how do you train your team? I like ideas from the panel on how to do that. One thing we've been doing is we give people an hour a day to learn. We also pay for their certifications. We have contests. We have defined training programs, but still an hour a day really isn't enough. And I think people are spending maybe 10 or 15 hours a week of their own time, which a lot of people who get into this industry are going to do regardless because they enjoy it. But I'd like to hear other ideas about reskilling a workforce. And it's almost a hamster wheel. Once you get on, you have to keep spinning, right? You're trying to learn Node.js, you have Kubernetes, you have pipelines and Azure DevOps, and it never ends. And how do you stay up? So, thank you.
Yeah, first, make sure you have teams. I had somebody ask me about moving their project teams. I said, I can't. The next thing is measure where you're at, find out how often you're going to master, find out how often you're going to production, how stable your builds are, and then have your team start pushing to real CI. Everybody on the team goes to master at least once a day with tested non-breaking code, and measure your ability to do that. And then what happens is you start finding all the reasons why you can't and fixing them, and that upskills the team. And you help them along the way. You don't say, you must do TDD. You say, here's some good ways to get that done, but this is our metrics goal we're trying to reach to, is we're trying to get to master at least once a day, everybody. How do we help each other get that done?
Yeah, I think adding to that, when you have a team focused on things together, then they can learn from each other. And if you're trying to solve a problem, it's not, I'm taking an hour out of my day to do this training. It's, I am doing this training to solve this problem. So it becomes less structured in saying 10% of your time can be devoted to training, and it becomes more of just an integral part of working together, is learning together and building up the skills needed to solve the next problem so that you can improve.
And just building off on that as well, it's important when you're having communication pipelines within your company, kind of generally speaking, that people are able to contextualize their feedback in a way that's relevant to you, right? So an engineer talking to another engineer, maybe in the same department or an adjacent one, would give a different level of detail to code than they would if they had to cross-present to sales or product or something else. They have to contextualize the information such that it's relevant, but the requests need to come in with that same contextualization so that the engineering team can interpret how they're translating business logic into code successfully.
And one other thing, if you have a team that you stand up like mine, make sure that that team is walking the talk. We push code a lot, not as often as we should because we're helping people. We train together, we do retrospectives together, we hold each other accountable to the ideals we want the other teams to emulate.
use the culture to teach the culture.
I teach group dynamics, team dynamics, and I know this is a different spectrum, but being a former homicide detective and a hostage negotiator, I worked on teams. And one thing that we have in common, the IT community as well as with my background, is that we're both problem solvers and we utilize deductive reasoning and we work in teams. That said, the concept is before there is a team, you have to have a team. And in order to have a team, you have to respect, you don't have to respect the individual. Sometimes you don't get along with the team member, but you have to respect their skill. And you have to, everyone in that team has to acknowledge the strengths and weaknesses of each individual. We had an individual on my team, for example, people didn't like him. He was rude and surly and just a nasty person. But one thing that we respected him for, he knew how to bug. He knew how to put in bugs in houses and knew how to do surveillance, and he was the best at it. So we respected him for it, and he was the master of it. So I think in order to have a team, you have to respect everyone's ability.
One thing that I would add is that to make sure that you're getting feedback from the ICs, I think that a lot of times that change happens and change is delegated from above without getting feedback from the teams that are actually going to be doing the work. So my feedback was to be engaging with the people that are actually have their hands in that.
I'm also a very big fan of hands-on effort. So if you want people to learn a set of new skills, you have to give them room to practice those skills, and that means they're going to make mistakes. So you need to give them a space where they can make mistakes and continue to have a job and not face negative consequences or recrimination. So think about things like lab environments, accounts where they can make an absolute mess of their AWS account and you just take off and nuke it from orbit. And that way, people have an opportunity to not only break things, but sometimes break them and fix them. And that teaches you much more than any sort of canned training ever will.
Next question.
So what would be the best advice you've received throughout your career that you can share with us?
I'm sorry, the audio was kind of...
What would be the best advice that you have received through your career that you would like to share with us?
What's the
Best advice you've had for your
Carlos is working on his next promo.
I'm sorry, I hear really well, but it's like 30% ringing. The best advice I have is to don't do what I did and get stuck in the same business problem for 15 years. I tell anytime I've had new developers come up to me, I had one recently come up to me at our local watering hole, and she said, what advice would you give me? I said, when you get bored, leave. Go to a different team, go to a different problem, keep challenging yourself, learn new things all the time, because that business problem, it's a thing, and it might be distribution systems, and it might stay there forever, maybe, but you're stuck. And you have a much better career if you go and learn new things.
Yeah, and similar, because I totally agree with that. Continue to try and grow toward areas. You might be in a position now that you can do really well, but maybe you're not passionate about it. And to work toward finding that place where you can actually bring passion to what you do every day.
Going back to some advice that I received back when I was in school, actually, academia is kind of a trade school for academia, right? But we go to college and then go into private sector. And you don't actually have a good expectation or knowledge set to know how what you're doing is impacting what other people are doing, not just within, different engineering teams or within the greater engineering org, but what does sales do? What does marketing do? How do they actually function? Why do requests come in the way they do? and how do they get translated. And if you can find time and space, and the company can culturally make time and space for different members and new hires as part of their onboarding to actually understand at least a very surface level what everyone's doing, then it can actually improve what expectations you can set with each other when you have to communicate, which will be often.
Say, I don't know, instead of bullshitting. Say, I'm sorry when you need to. And keep learning all the time.
Wow, I feel like I need something profound. I think the most useful skill, which I think that I've seen work time and time again, is get everybody into a room and get on the whiteboard and have them walk through the end-to-end process of what actually happened, and do that across domains, do that across handoffs, do that across teams. There's a great book called Learning to See. It's kind of based in, it's a book made for plant manufacturing. And, it's about the idea of value stream mapping. And yeah, it's about factories and trucks and cars and parts, but like it brings that philosophy about that visualizing the end-to-end system and having everybody agree on what that actually looks like. It's incredible that in so many different contexts, that helps clear up the vocabulary, put the same mental model in people's heads, and stuff just starts getting done. Right? It's an incredible thing, and it sounds so simple, and I just can't discount or can't sing enough praises for how well that works.
Mine would be for my mom, and it's the harder you work, the luckier you get. I get what I put in, and part of that is like, working on yourself. And I think I talked about a little bit about that today. Is like watching your own your self-talk. Like, what are you telling yourself? What do you think when you get an email from your boss that he wants to meet with you? I can tell you that I used to think that this is going to be a problem. I'm going to be in trouble. I got called in, and I actually had gotten a promotion. Thinking about the things that I'm telling myself constantly. Am I going to get ahead? Am I, I think that watching that self-talk is very important.
Well, there's a meme I use and I posted on my Facebook. It says that if someone give you power, you never had power in the first place. Real power is something that you take. And what you have, your skills and your ability, and the years of training and education that you have, I guarantee you, each one of you can take what you have, your skill, and convert it to anything. Just think about it. FBI hostage negotiation. Who would think that I can turn that into a team building lecture, a team building workshop? Who would think that I would take profiling skills and turn it around and to utilize it to profile social media accurately? You have a skill, you have a story, but most importantly, it's something to fall back on. If you just sit back, and like I said earlier, if anybody was listening, and you're in the shower and you want to talk to yourself and you think about something, and think about something that you do in your field right now, and think, how can I convert that into somewhere else? If I'm not happy where I'm at, how can I convert that and utilize it and pitch it and make it my own? Anything can be done. So just think about that. Whatever you learn with your years training and education and experience, whatever you have, you can convert it into something else and implement it into another field.
I think for me, it was the idea of be better tomorrow than you were today. And if you just take small steps every day to be a little bit better, after a long period of time, you'll look back and see really how far you've come. I think that applies to a lot of situations in life, not just professionally, but also personally.
All right, next question.
I have a question about, so definitely going to the DevOps is really great.
Can you speak up a little?
Yeah, so going to the DevOps is really great. But looking at the landscape of the organization, typically we have the applications which are 50, 30 years old, like mainframes or so. How do I really foresee the path to move toward the DevOps for such applications?
So a lot of the focus that I used to do in my old consulting life was around large enterprises. So I worked with a lot of folks that were trying to do the new DevOps stuff in large enterprises. And the original idea was sort of the Gartner bimodal idea, like, oh, we're going to have this new team, and they're going to work in a new way, and then we'll have the old stuff, and they're going to work in the old way, and it's going to be great, right? They're going to be stable over here, and they're going to be wild and crazy over here. And the reality was that everything's interconnected, right? You can't really divide the world up that way. All yours, this is where the money is over here, this is the new shiny stuff on top of that. It just doesn't, you can't just disconnect it. And they found that it was causing much more dysfunction, and they were focusing too much on sort of like the outputs, right? Like, oh, what kind of pipeline do you have and whatever, and rather than looking at how are we working, right? And then treating everything as we're going to change how these teams work, right? Smaller batch sizes, faster feedback, getting shifting left, getting ops ready early in the life cycle. That has nothing to do with technology. That's just how people get together and communicate and work. And there's people like Rosalind Radcliffe, who is one of the distinguished fellows at IBM. Like, she's the queen of the Z mainframe, and she goes around the world teaching development teams. You can do all these modern development techniques on the mainframe. So if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. But she doesn't really do it as a way of you must do this. She does it as a way of basically saying, don't use that as an excuse, because that doesn't matter. What matters is all the things I talked about you can do without anything in the technology. It's just how people are working. And then that's something you can drive consistently across the entire organization. And sure, the outputs they actually do might look a little different because they're in different environments and different things happening, but you need to get to a place where you're kind of uplifting how the whole organization approaches their work, and then, things start moving way faster. It can be done.
You may be surprised to learn that Walmart has some old systems. And not only can you do it on a mainframe, but you can also do it on C. No, honestly, we have old systems out there. What it means is that, simple pipelines can't be used on simple systems. You build more robust pipelines to work on more robust systems. You look at that system and say, okay, we don't want to rewrite it. Please don't rewrite your systems, because we've run that experiment. I can tell you how it ends. Damon told us not to. And we did it anyway. You just build the ability to deploy that thing faster, and then you start looking at how we peel it apart. We took one of our systems, in logistics, we used domain-driven design, started saying, okay, we need a border here, 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 and we started pulling it apart into business functionality, right? And you just evolve that terrible old thing into something good. And yeah, don't stand up the new guys and the old guys, because the new guys are going to build something that the business won't talk to them about, because the business is being run by the old. The business doesn't have time to talk about the new because it's not going to run the business for a while. And then the new guys are going to try to catch up with all the business features going into the old stuff, right? You must make the old new.
Is this on?
What's the next question?
Yeah. So this may be a little too broad or too technical, but could any of you talk about what does configuration management look like in an immutable infrastructure world? Like, you're using containers and you're doing continuous deployment. Do you still have a need for Chef or Puppet? If so, how do they fit in, that type of thing?
No, down here.
I'm not touching that one.
What does your shirt say again?
So I don't know if this is not a right answer, because I think there's a million different ways you can do things. I'll just share with you what we do. So we don't use Chef or Puppet. We're completely immutable. We're using Packer and Terraform. And so we basically, the EC2 instances that we run our Kubernetes nodes on, we're using EKS and AWS, and we pack those on a weekly basis for patching, and we don't touch them after that. We install the agent for Kubernetes, and we don't touch those machines. And then the same thing, we use containers, so we build those once, and the only thing that we inject is secrets. So anything that would change, it's either secret or would change per customer and per environment.
I think another interesting thing is, what question are you probably trying to answer, right? If it's immutable, maybe you can do it through inventory or something else, or So I think need is an interesting comment, but if it's giving you value, then yes, you can do that. If it's, don't just do it to do it though, right? There's other ways to probably solve that problem if that's what you're looking for.
There's kind of also like a philosophical answer, right? Which is, how's configuration managed? Is configuration something that's done internal to the application and, done through a database or done through, like a console or something like that? Or is it something that you do externally, right? Is configuration something that kind of happens to something that's managed by some external service? I think that's the fundamental kind of initial decision point that needs to be made, is what is our philosophy on our design pattern on how we're going to configure these things that we're creating. And then from there, it's just finding the right tools to make it happen. Right. And I said design patterns looking at Mike because he's the king of those. So great architecture design patterns in his book. I'm going to promote it to the person's question before.
Where can I buy the book, Mike?
Was it ship it? Release it. Jesus. It's on my Kindle. I forget what it's called.
Or there's a website like Amazon, maybe?
There's some tropical forest
bookstore that sells books.
Release it. There's also a Design It that's an excellent book, although I didn't write it. They're all part of the IT series from the Pragmatic Programmers.
And the reason why I was bringing it up is the conversation about how do we get the legacy and the new talking to each other. If you start to teach design patterns, like what's a circuit breaker, what does it solve, right? You can talk about that level and say, okay, we want to do this. On the new applications, we'll just build it in. In the old applications, how do we when we're saying we're going to refactor, what are we refactoring for? Oh, we're refactoring for so we have consistent design patterns like we have with the new stuff. Like what kind of configuration management choices are we driving towards? That's part of that getting together and mapping it out, but not thinking that you're different, the legacy's different than the new, because everything's legacy the moment you check it in.
I guess it's my turn. Thank everybody for their talks. Loved the conference so far. My question is around kind of SRE behaviors and SLOs and SLIs when we're an organization that's had the traditional dev and ops split. And so what kinds of things, what is a useful way to help roll out that type of process or that type of organizational shift?
You asking what's a good process to roll out that way of working?
A good way to introduce that to, say, our business partners who maybe...
Oh, business partners?
Yeah.
Find a friendly one, and then deliver to them a lot, and then make the rest of them jealous, right, is really the best way. Is you've got to find somebody who's willing to just think outside of the last 50 years box, and who wants to work with you. And when you find them, latch onto them, make them your best friend, right? And bring them in close. And then, like I said, ship. And then, look, we're shipping. Would you like some of this too?
So one way that you could get started is by changing the incentive structures and the motivations. I've often said that you could change an enormous amount of behavior by making developers accountable for uptime and operations or SRE accountable for feature delivery rate. Just do that alone, and you'll see all kinds of changes start.
And one other thing, from a developer point of view, I told my boss this last month. 2 years ago, we brought in Hygeia and we gamified Hygeia. And we scored different components based off of the behavior we wanted to see. So we wanted you to do trunk-based continuous integration. So we scored SCM around that. And that had a really amazing, just passive training impact. Because people want they want 5 stars for whatever reason. They want 5 stars. And all they did was ask us, how do I get 5 stars? Like, oh, you need to do trunk-based continuous integration. Well, so we do. We can help. And we just did that, right? And that helped roll it out to developers. We had some developers, well, the business doesn't want it that fast. And that's where you find that business person and you show them what happens when you get it to them that fast, and everybody else gets jealous.
Okay, so I have kind of a fun, open-ended question. DevOps is a journey, and we're all kind of on it. As I went through my journey, I learned that people started out, what is DevOps, right? They just don't understand it, and I really like the ITIL correlation from one of the earlier talks. That was new for me. But one of the things I observed as I was going through this, I had the opportunity to interview a very large tech company and talk to one of their agile leads, somebody that you wouldn't normally get to talk to. And it became interesting to me. That company, they saw it because they were in tech. Hey, if we don't do this, we're dead, right? So they had top-down buy-in. And my last question was really about the bottoms up, the grassroots, and that hits a ceiling, and then the top down comes in. But my question is really this, right? There are just individuals out there with personalities that are so risk averse or whatever, right? Whatever their background is, that it almost appears to me that you would have to hit that what I call the oh shit moment. Right? It's like when you have the seatbelt on and you're going to get in a wreck, and it's at that point that you go, we got to do something. Or after the wreck, you go, well, we've got to do something, right? Once they start to understand it, I'm interested in your experience with these. If you've come up against them, is it really that, or are there better ways to educate them? Is this a communication failure, et cetera? Actually, one more comment is, I really think at the end of the day, I've thought a lot about this. I think this is a human psychology thing. So I just am not really sure. And we've got a very diverse panel, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
I guess I'll kick off. So I have a few thoughts, and I think it's not necessarily all one thing, right? Because everybody functions differently. Different companies have different problems and are different sizes. So some of it's probably communication breakdown and difficulty, and some of it is we're all the summation of our experiences. So every time we bring ourselves to the table or to a new table when we're transitioning to a new role or whatever's going on, we're also instantiating new processes while upsetting old processes that maybe ought to be. But that means there's a lot of chaos, and managing chaos by definition isn't going to be easy. So I think that is going to hit on a lot of the issues that I think people encounter when they're trying to make these, when they're trying to get a handle on the DevOps space in general and make the transitions into the culture and things like that. I'm going to just go this way.
So I think a big part of it, you really hit on it there, like, okay, everyone else is doing this, we're going to be hosed if we don't do it too. And that really can't be a reason for transition. So at some level, I'm definitely a big proponent for the grassroots. That's how I got involved in this in the first place. And with the user community and with just talking to and building up teams. And when you get it at that grassroots level and you have a few teams that buy into it and that get excited about it, that you start having something to show. So if you can show some real value, then as you're trying to move your way up and kind of cut through that glass ceiling or that sometimes it's not glass, it feels like a lead ceiling you're trying to get through. If you have something where you can say, look at this, right? And then the other part of it is that you may be finding that person who's completely risk averse, completely not understanding the need to move faster, the need to do this. Depending on the size of the company and your options, one valid route, I think, is to go find the advocate, right? Find someone else at that level or at that higher level who does have more of the mindset, and start there. Don't start with the hardest problem first, because it's going to be the least effective. So you can try and find that as well, I think.
And find out what they need. I was talking to Scott from Columbia Sports a couple of years ago at DevOps conference, and he said that we should have, instead of going for engineering degrees, we should have gone for psychology. He said, because we're trying to hack the biggest undocumented API. And I use that all the time. I was like, it's perfect. And so developers, don't cry into your pillow, deploy more, sleep better. VP, you can capitalize earlier if we ship small stories today than you can if we ship big things at the end of the quarter, right? I mean, what motivates them? How do you get them engaged? Like, this is how it can help. This is reality. It works. Hey, and we use expert as a service. Instead of hiring consultants, I call Verizon. I call Capital One. Can you talk to my people? And then we do that for them. We help each other because we're smarter than they are because we don't work for them and vice versa, right? So just learn what they need and show how it serves them.
So I have a bit of a contrarian view. Like, why do you want to change these people? Do you think you're going to make the business better, or is it make your job better? Like, why are you trying to change them?
So the reason is because we are not structured in a way that makes DevOps efficiently possible. And they are the ones that can control that.
True, but maybe they have their own reasons, right? I mean, I feel like we have this idea that, we must change this. We must do it the right way, otherwise the business is going to suffer, or otherwise something's going to happen. And I kind of look at it like technology, it's a tool. We build a tool that we're building this, like, ever see the movie Kill Bill, the Hattori Hanzo sword? It's the greatest samurai sword of all time. But you hand it to somebody who's just going to drop it on their foot and cut off their toes, what do we accomplish, right? Maybe they don't need to kill anybody today. Maybe they, maybe they just want something else for the wall, or maybe they actually, want to, something else, right? So at the end of the day, it's like the best. What I look at it as is the business needs to do what the business needs to do. And if it's not on the top of their list to solve these problems, for whatever fear or concern or better thought in their mind, we can't have the hubris to push it on them to be like, you must do this because this is the most optimum thing for the technology organization. I think we have to look at it as what I can think we can focus on is, I saw something the other day, it was roughly 100 million people who work in development or operations jobs around the world. We can make their lives better. Right? We don't have to even fix the business. Just think about how can we make the lives of our colleagues better? How can we make it so they can get home to their kids faster or to their hobbies or whatever they do, right? They can sleep at night. They can feel some satisfaction and they're not full of toil and frustration in their day-to-day job. That is in our control, and we should strive for that. But, I think where we run into problems, we turn ourselves into knots trying to fix a business that doesn't want to be fixed. And a lot of times, if you guys read the Phoenix Project, there was that idea of everyone was freaking out about the audit, and then it turns out the audit team had some compensating controls that can just paper all that over, right? And a lot of businesses have other business advantages that can paper over these IT deficiencies, so it's not top of mind for them right now. So maybe we can focus internally on, say, how do we make this organization just work better and feel better for everybody and a better use of our time? And then if someday they want to become samurais and pick up this great sword and conquer the land, then that's fantastic. And if they don't, at least made our colleagues' lives better, and maybe we move on somewhere else where they do. I just see a lot of effort and frustration going into change people who don't want to be changed. I know it's a little bit of a contrarian view, but that's kind of how I think about it.
So I guess now we have a way of integrating Kill Bill into our meetings, right? And the sword.
So I have an observation and a couple of tactics. My observation is that over time, companies sort of evolve to diffuse responsibility as broadly and as thinly as possible. And it's kind of a survival strategy for people in those companies to not stand up and say, I'm the one accountable for this particular outcome. And so sort of left to its own devices, that process will continue. And what you're actually asking people to do is put themselves at great risk in an organization that may have, in fact, filtered out everyone who is willing to take risks already. In a case like that, you're not just going to need top-down support or bottom-up support or middle-out support. You certainly need all of those. But making change can still feel a little bit like punching a wall of marshmallow. Nobody's actually opposing you, but you still don't get anywhere. So my tactic is find the people who are interested in working this way and begin bringing them together. They're probably kind of regarded as misfits and malcontents in their other units anyway. So it's not too hard to build your Omega team out of the folks that want to work differently and are sort of agitating elsewhere. And then sort of like bringing together bits of plutonium. Damon went with a samurai sword, so I have to go bigger. You're bringing together bits of plutonium. Separately, there's no reaction, everything fizzles. You bring them together, and it becomes very energetic.
I really like that. Thank you.
Pass it to Bryan.
I was going to say from like the engineer perspective, that glass ceiling is real. At a previous company, I tried for a long time to get them to adopt a more of a continuous improvement mindset, and I was unsuccessful. And ultimately, I just voted with my feet and left. And I think at some point, you might just decide like the organization's not going to be the change that I want to see. So I'm going to go find an organization that more aligns closely to my values and what I want to see out of the organization. But something I read, I don't remember where I read it, talks about build momentum and then navigate around the people that are blocking your change. So if you have a naysayer in your organization, if you're like in middle management, and you have the ability to do that, you can form a coalition of like-minded individuals, and then you can navigate around the person that's blocking you until the momentum basically overcomes their negative decision.
In my opinion, it's who has more to lose. If you have the primary investment, then you have to stay. And as I was watching you listen to Damon here, I'm sorry, I apologize, bad with names. I saw you were utilizing your what I call active listening skills. You were shaking your head, you were agreeing. The more times you were shaking your head, it seemed like you followed your concept, your philosophy was more in tune with David's than anyone else's here because of your eye contact, and you were shaking your head, moving your head and nodding. It's just like when you talk to someone, and it's all based on, to me, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it's communication and it's observation. You could sit around, and if you and I were in a group or in a team, I would sit and I would just sit there and observe you. People always thought I was never the lead detective because I never said a word in an interview. I just sit there and observed, and I watched and I listened and I took notes. And you can take these individuals and some of the malcontents, you can find strengths in anyone. And find their strengths. Just listen and observe and watch and find their strengths and hone them in on their strengths. Don't give them something, don't allow them to do something that they're going to screw up or they're not going to be happy with. People have to be happy. You can waste time. Some people say you can waste time trying to make other people happy, but in my opinion, if it's your investment and you have more to lose, then it's worth the time and it's worth the effort.
I also would say find a change maker. There's a really good book called by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. And I think that you need to know your audience and you need to be able to sell it to them about why this is going to be benefiting them and not necessarily why it's benefiting you and the things that you want to do, but you need to take it and you need them to want to believe it, you need them to want to feel it, and you need them to want to accept that change and want it.
As a malcontent and misfit, you need air cover. It's important to have air cover. You need to stay just this side and promoted to customer. Don't get promoted to customer. And absolutely, you need to find the insurgency and start the guerrilla warfare. There's things that we did that were successful that if we'd asked permission to do them, they never would have happened. Oh, no, it's just not a priority, or there's no budget for that. No, we just installed Kubernetes and said, hey, look, it works, right? Right. I mean, it's like, no, we're just going to do this thing, right? And really, of course, at Walmart, we've had that culture. When I added logging to the application I was on. You're allowed to make things better as long as they don't break things, and as long as you don't ask, right? But find that insurgency, make sure you have some air cover. If you have no air cover, then you don't have good ground to grow in, and it could be that you can get air cover somewhere else.
Hey, my question is a follow-up question on those configuration management and adjustment which is brought up. In the journey of CI/CD, of DevOps, is there still need of those specialized job roles such as configuration manager or release manager? Or you provide a better tool for team to manage their self? If you have multiple team, is the best practice is rotate all those release between the different team, or you have dedicated team to do it? I'd like to take what are your advice on it?
So was it, just to repeat it back, was it in the new world, do you have the specific role still, release engineer, configuration manager, et cetera? Was that the question?
Yes.
The specific role.
I mean, on my team, I hit the release button. I mean, literally. Do it? Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think really the goal is that the team owns their thing, top to bottom, and gets it out there, right? And any permission they have to ask is going to slow things down and make things more dangerous. Because if I have to ask permission, then the size of thing I'm going to deploy is bigger, which means it's more scary because it's got more bugs. If you want to find a needle in a haystack, make the haystack smaller. And so you need to be working towards that team has ownership, not responsibility. They own.
Right, I think when you're talking specifically about like release management and different roles in a team or in a company, those roles move more from working directly with teams to like help and assist that team with their deployments and stuff, to roles and teams that more own an automated release system, an automated deployment tool, an automated build tool. They own security products that you're going to run in your pipeline and provide those as self-service to these product teams so they can consume them.
I mean, I think this is a pattern across the board, which is split the building of the infrastructure from the running of the infrastructure, right? So, you know, whether it's the build team, whether it's a data team, like the database team, infrastructure, you know, platforms, middleware, whatever it might be. I think the successful organizations are splitting the build of that, the design time of that. Like, oh, this is the platform we're, you know, going to make available to everybody. This is the build system that we're going to make available to everybody. This is the, you know, the release management capabilities. Instead of looking at themselves as, oh, we do that. You know, the work when the pipeline, the work's flowing through the factory, it comes to our workstation and we do it for somebody. I think that you're seeing as can't move fast enough and is too disconnected and has too many issues. Instead, we're seeing people say, let's split that apart from building the system and then distributing the ability to run it to everybody else. So like in Bryan's situation, you know, he didn't build the button, right? He probably knows how to configure it, knows how to extend it. A certain amount of that has been delegated to his team to configure how they want to do it. But somebody else, some other team has built that infrastructure and coached them on how to use it. But in the day-to-day instantiation of that process, it happens all day long. They are in full control of their own destiny. So I think that's the design pattern, is splitting it out into a team that builds and coaches other people on how to run it on a day-to-day basis.
You know, somebody was asking me about that earlier, and this is really important. You want a common delivery platform. You don't want everybody to have standing up their own Jenkins instances, because that's a nightmare. But my team is an extension of the delivery platform area. We own the tool. You own the configuration. We supply the tool. We show you how to use it. You're responsible for configuring it for your business case. And that's how you make that divide.
I think we have time for one more question. Who's going to have the hard-hitting one?
How does a manual tester fit into DevOps?
There you go. Don't everyone take the mic at once.
It is a thing.
They go and look for the tests we didn't think of. That's it.
Yeah, they start to use their brains and be innovative and see how they can break it instead of running steps over steps over steps over steps that the machines can do.
And to kind of build off that a little bit, depending on what your testing environment looks like, where you might have developers, testing their own code, but then you have user testing. How does the user behave? And usually when you're having someone doing manual QA, they're mimicking user behavior instead of just making sure that a function executes. You can automate that depending on a variety of factors, perhaps, but if you can't for whatever reason, it definitely still applies, right? You need to make sure that the user's actually able to use it as you intend them to and as they believe they're intended to.
For me, it's the idea that we're trying to improve ourselves as SREs or DevOps people. I think manual testers should have the same mindset, right? Maybe spend some of your time learning how to write automated tests. I was talking to somebody earlier, and they were talking about how they do statements, like financial statements, and there's rules around that in each state. So maybe there's a small role for some manual testing, but I think you're going to have to look at broadening your horizon and branch out into other things.
As you said, things are moving fast enough. Manual testing, we're never going to have enough time or enough bandwidth or enough people to do the level of testing that we need to have. So the question comes up, well, what happens to the manual testing? And I've seen folks, literally, organizations get rid of their testing, their QA organizations. And the business case is very clear, which is, we have 800 developers and we have 400 folks in QA. Wouldn't it be great if we had 1,200 developers, right? So let's get rid of that head count and bring it on board and say, hey, let's teach. As part of the developer responsibility, they are responsible for writing their own tests, writing their automated tests, right? Which becomes layers and layers and builds this kind of gauntlet which we can protect ourselves. So what happens to the folks that, and this is true stories, who were the manual kind of testing brigade? Some left, right? Some developed new skills, got really into the automated testing, kind of taught themselves and became experts in it. And other folks kind of became product managers for automated tests. Right? I mean, they didn't really call them that, but that was the idea. Their idea was to be part of the coaching, training team that would work with the developers to make sure they're approaching this testing with the right mindset. But also, they would kind of act like product managers. What are we missing here? How's this working for people? What's really going on here? And they'd own that experience to make sure that they're getting the most out of that new 1,200 engineer organization that they were a part of. But those jobs are also less, right? So you got to be honest that if you aren't willing to, dive into the automated test frameworks, feet first and really become skilled at them, or you aren't willing to be part of that kind of that tooling building team and sort of the coach / kind of product managers around testing, the squeeze does come.
Well, thank you for all the questions. Let's give a round of applause for our speaker panel. Thank you guys for your time and your knowledge.